I always thought my life with Emily was a quiet masterpiece, painted in soft hues of routine and trust. We'd been married 12 years, a stretch of time that felt like a warm blanket, comfortable, familiar, dependable. Our home in Portland, a modest two-story with ivy creeping up the brick, was our sanctuary. I worked as a structural engineer, spending my days sketching blueprints for bridges and buildings, while Emily taught literature at the community college. Her voice, lilting and precise, could make even the dullest sonnet sound like a love letter. I adored that about her. Our evenings were simple. Dinner at the oak table, her grading papers, me tinkering with a model train set in the basement. It wasn't glamorous, but it was ours. The first crack appeared in late September, though I didn't see it then. Emily started lingering at the college longer than usual. She'd text me, "Book club ran late," or "helping a student with an essay," and I'd nod at my phone, trusting her implicitly. She'd come home with that same bright smile, her auburn hair slightly mussed, and I'd kiss her forehead, never questioning. Why would I? She was my Emily, the woman who'd cried with me when my father passed, who'd laughed at my terrible puns over burnt pancakes. Doubt wasn't part of our vocabulary. But then came the scarf. One evening, as I folded laundry in our bedroom, I found it tucked in her coat pocket. A thin, emerald green thing, silky and unfamiliar. It wasn't hers. Emily favored earthy tones, browns and creams. This was bold, almost theatrical. I held it up when she got home, my tone light. "Whose is this?" I asked, expecting a simple answer, a student's, a colleague's. Her face flickered, just for a heartbeat, before she laughed. "Oh, it's Lisa's. She left it in my office." Lisa was her coworker, a drama professor with a loud laugh. It made sense. I let it go, draping the scarf over a chair. But something lingered in me, a tiny splinter of unease I couldn't name. Over the next few weeks, the splinters multiplied. Her phone buzzed more often, and she tilted away from me, her thumbs dancing across the screen. She started wearing perfume again, something sharp and citrusy she hadn't touched in years. I'd catch her staring out the kitchen window, lost in thought, her lips curving in a way that wasn't for me. I told myself it was nothing. People change, don't they? Marriages evolve. I buried the unease under layers of logic, focusing on my latest project, a suspension bridge design that demanded precision. I didn't want to see what was brewing beneath our quiet life. By November, the air in our house felt different, heavier. Emily's late nights grew frequent, and her excuses sharpened, less casual, more rehearsed. "Department meeting," she'd say, or "curriculum planning." I'd nod, stirring my coffee, but the splinter in my chest had grown into a dull ache. I started paying attention. She'd leave her laptop open sometimes, and once, when she was in the shower, I glanced at it. An email from T. Carver popped up in her inbox. "Can't wait to see you tomorrow. Wear the green." My stomach twisted. The scarf flashed in my mind. Emerald, silky, wrong. I closed the laptop, my hands trembling. Could mean anything, I told myself. A friend, a joke. But the ache deepened. Then I heard him. It was a Thursday night, rain tapping the windows like impatient fingers. Emily was in the living room on the phone, her voice low but animated. I'd been in the basement, adjusting a derailment on my train set, when I climbed the stairs for a glass of water. Her laughter stopped me cold, bright, unguarded, the kind she hadn't given me in months. "Oh, Tom, you're ridiculous," she said, and my chest tightened. Tom. T. Carver. I stood there, frozen, the stair creaking under my weight. She didn't hear me. "No, he's clueless," she added, softer now. "Busy with his bridges." Clueless. Me. I didn't confront her. Not then. I retreated to the basement, my mind spinning. Who was Tom? A colleague? A student? I pictured her at the college, surrounded by eager faces, and imagined one standing out. A man with a voice that made her laugh like that. The next day, I did something I'd never done before. I checked her phone while she slept. She changed her passcode. That night, I barely slept, the sound of her laughter echoing in my skull. A stranger's name lodged in my throat. I became a detective in my own home, though I hated every second of it. Emily's routines shifted subtly. She'd shower as soon as she got home, her clothes disappearing into the laundry before I could touch them. She'd hum unfamiliar tunes, her fingers tapping rhythms I didn't recognize. I started cataloging these changes, scribbling notes in a moleskin I kept hidden in my toolbox. November 12th. New earrings, silver hoops. November 14th. Lipstick, red, not her shade. Felt obsessive, but I couldn't stop. The woman I'd loved for over a decade was slipping into someone else, and I needed proof. One afternoon, I followed her. She'd said she was meeting Lisa for coffee, but I called the college. Lisa was teaching a class. My heart pounded as I trailed her Prius downtown, keeping 2 cars between us. She parked near a bistro, a quaint place with ivy-covered walls, and stepped out, her coat catching the wind. Then he appeared. Tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair and an easy grin. Tom, I assumed. He hugged her, his hand lingering on her back, and she leaned into it. They went inside, and I sat in my truck, gripping the wheel until my knuckles whitened. I didn't go in. I didn't need to. That night, she came home late, her cheeks flushed. "Lisa says hi," she lied, dropping her bag on the counter. I nodded, my jaw tight, and watched her move through our kitchen like nothing had changed. But everything had. I started digging online. Tom Carver, adjunct professor of creative writing. His faculty photo showed that grin, those eyes she'd chosen over mine. I found his ex-profile, full of witty quips and photos of him at readings, Emily liking everyone. The betrayal wasn't just a moment. It was a tapestry she'd woven behind my back. I didn't sleep for days, my mind a storm of rage and grief. Emily moved through our house oblivious, her lies piling up like dust. I couldn't confront her, not yet. Anger burned too hot, and I wanted something sharper than words. Revenge. Not impulsive, not messy, but calculated, cruel. A mirror to the pain she'd carved into me. I stopped eating with her, claiming deadlines, and retreated to my basement, where my train set became a map for something darker. Tom was the key. I studied him, his lectures, his habits, his arrogance. He posted about a book launch in 2 weeks, a big event at a downtown gallery. Emily would be there, I knew it. I'd seen the excitement in her eyes when she mentioned a work thing that matched the date. I started crafting a plan, one that would unravel them both piece by piece. I'd use what I knew best: structure, precision, collapse. I bought a burner phone, anonymous and untraceable, and began laying groundwork. I contacted a print shop, ordering flyers, hundreds of them, designed to look like event promos. I hacked together a fake email from the gallery, inviting local press, students, anyone who'd show up. The flyers would reveal something else, though, something Tom and Emily wouldn't see coming. I spent nights in the basement, perfecting every detail, my hands steady despite the chaos in my chest. This wasn't just about hurting them. It was about exposing them, stripping them bare. The day of the launch crept closer, and I played my part flawlessly. Emily chattered about her work thing, oblivious to the storm I'd built. I smiled, kissed her cheek, told her to have fun. Inside, I was a coiled spring, every nerve taut. I'd scattered the flyers that morning, across campus, downtown, even near the gallery. They looked innocent. Tom Carver book launch, special guest appearance. But buried in the fine print, a teaser, a revelation you won't forget. I arrived early, blending into the crowd, students, professors, strangers clutching wine glasses. Emily stood near Tom, radiant in a green dress that matched that damned scarf. They laughed, touched, oblivious. Then the murmurs started. People read the flyers, their eyes widening. I'd leaked a truth. Tom's affair with a married colleague. Names omitted but obvious to anyone watching them. Whispers spread, and I saw Emily's face falter, Tom's grin fade. My revenge had begun, and this was just the opening act. The gallery buzzed with confusion as the whispers grew louder. I stood near the back, a shadow among the crowd, watching Emily's face shift from radiant to pale. Tom's hand dropped from her arm, his easy grin replaced by a tight-lipped grimace. The flyers had done their work. Vague enough to dodge legal trouble, pointed enough to spark suspicion. People glanced at them, then at each other, piecing it together. A student near me muttered, "Wait, is that about her?" and nodded toward Emily. My chest tightened with a bitter satisfaction. She caught my eye across the room, just for a second, and I saw it. Panic, raw and unguarded. She didn't know I'd orchestrated this. Not yet. But she felt the ground slipping. I turned away, sipping my wine, letting her stew. Tom leaned in, whispering something, and she nodded, her movements jerky. They slipped toward a side door, probably to regroup, to spin a story. I didn't follow. I didn't need to. The seed was planted, and the crowd was watering it with every hushed word. Back home, I waited. She stumbled in after midnight, her green dress wrinkled, her eyes red. "Rough night?" I asked, my tone neutral, stirring a late-night tea. She froze, then forced a smile. "Just a mess at the event. Some stupid rumor." Her voice cracked, and I nodded, letting her think I was still the clueless husband. "Sounds exhausting," I said, and she mumbled agreement, retreating upstairs. I stayed in the kitchen, staring at the steam rising from my mug, plotting the next move. This wasn't enough. I wanted her to feel the weight of her own lies, not just whispers in a room. The next day, I upped the ante. Using the burner phone, I sent an anonymous tip to the college dean. Nothing explicit, just a nudge about unprofessional conduct between faculty members. I attached a photo I'd snapped at the bistro weeks ago. Emily and Tom too close, her hand on his. Let them explain that. I mailed it from a postbox downtown. Gloves on, no trace. The gears were turning, and I was the engineer behind it all. Emily started unraveling. She came home the next evening, her face drawn, her hands trembling as she poured wine. "Something's wrong at work," she said, her voice thin. "They're asking questions." I raised an eyebrow, feigning concern. "About what?" She hesitated, then waved it off. "Just gossip. It'll blow over." But it wouldn't. I'd made sure of that. The dean's office had called her in. I learned later through a friend on staff, someone I'd casually asked to keep an ear out. They'd shown her the photo. She denied everything, of course, but doubt was spreading like ink in water. Tom was crumbling too. His ex-posts turned defensive, cryptic rants about small-minded people and false accusations. I scrolled through them in the basement, my train set abandoned, a smirk tugging at my lips. He'd canceled a class, citing personal reasons, and I wondered how long he'd hold out. Emily stopped humming, stopped smiling. She'd sit at the table, staring at her phone, waiting for it to buzz with salvation that wouldn't come. I watched her silently, my anger a quiet furnace. I pushed further. I hired a freelancer online, some tech kid from halfway across the world, to dig into Tom's life. A few $100 later, I had a dossier. Debts, a messy divorce, a reputation for charming his way out of trouble. I leaked snippets to a local blog, anonymous again, framing it as faculty whispers. The post went up Friday night. Creative writing prof's creative lies? No names, just enough to point fingers. By Monday, it was circulating on Campus X accounts, students speculating, professors distancing themselves. Emily's name wasn't mentioned, but she felt the heat. She had to. She broke on Tuesday. I came home to find her pacing the living room, her phone clutched like a lifeline. "They're suspending me," she blurted, tears streaking her face. "Pending an investigation. Someone's spreading lies, John." I set my keys down, my expression soft, hiding the storm inside. "Who would do that?" I asked, and she shook her head, wild-eyed. "I don't know. It's insane." I almost laughed. Insane was her thinking I'd stay blind forever. She didn't mention Tom, not directly, but I saw his shadow in her panic. "They think I'm involved with someone," she added, quieter now, testing me. I shrugged. "Are you?" Her eyes widened, then narrowed. "How can you even ask that?" she snapped, and I let it hang there, the first real crack in her facade. She stormed upstairs, and I heard the shower run. Her ritual to wash away guilt, I supposed. I didn't care. The suspension was my doing, and it was only the beginning. That night, I escalated. I kept one ace up my sleeve. Recordings. Weeks ago, I'd planted a tiny voice-activated device in her car. Nothing fancy, just enough to catch fragments. I'd listen to her and Tom, their laughter, their plans, her calling me boring, while his voice purred in response. I edited the clips, stripping names, keeping it vague but damning. I uploaded it to a throwaway account and sent it to the college's student forum, titled Faculty Secrets. By morning, it was viral, students dissecting every word. Emily's voice unmistakable to those who knew her. She'd feel that knife twist soon. Wednesday was chaos. Emily didn't leave the house. Her phone rang endlessly. Colleagues, the dean, friends, and she ignored it, curled on the couch like a wounded animal. I played the concerned husband, bringing her tea, asking gentle questions she brushed off. "I just need space," she muttered, and I gave it, retreating to my basement to watch the fallout online. The recording had ignited a firestorm. Students demanded transparency. Faculty scrambled to distance themselves. Tom posted a frantic denial, claiming it was manipulated, but no one bought it. She confronted me that evening, her voice raw. "Did you hear about this audio thing?" she asked, eyes searching mine. I nodded, keeping my face blank. "Sounds messy. You okay?" She stared at me, suspicion flickering, then shook her head. "I don't know who's doing this." I almost told her then, almost let the mask slip, but I held back. The revenge wasn't complete. I wanted her to drown in it first. I mailed the final blow that night. A package to Tom's apartment, no return address. Inside, a printed photo from the bistro, blown up, with a note. "She's not worth it. Let him stew on that. Let him wonder who knew." I pictured him pacing, unraveling, blaming her. The cracks in their little world were widening, and I was the sledgehammer. Thursday, Emily cracked fully. She sat me down, her hands shaking, and confessed. "Not everything, but enough. There's a colleague, Tom," she said, voice breaking. "It's not what people think, but we got close. Too close." She waited for my reaction, tears spilling. I stayed silent, letting her words hang like a noose. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she added, and I nodded, slow and deliberate. "I believe you." I lied, my tone calm, my mind racing. She thought this was the end, that her half-truth would mend us. She didn't know I'd already torn her world apart, that Tom's career was crumbling, that the college was circling like vultures. I let her cling to that hope, let her think I was still hers to salvage. But downstairs, in my basement, the final pieces waited. A plan so cruel, so precise, it would leave them both in ruins. The bridge I'd built for her collapse was almost complete. Emily's confession hung in the air like smoke, fragile and incomplete. She thought it absolved her, that her trembling words and tear-streaked face would pull me back into her orbit. I let her believe it. "We'll figure it out," I said, my voice steady, my hand resting on hers just long enough to feel her relax. She exhaled, a shaky smile breaking through, and I mirrored it, masking the fury coiling inside me. She didn't know the machine I'd built was already in motion, its gears grinding toward a finale she couldn't imagine. Downstairs, in the basement, my sanctuary had become a war room. The train set lay neglected, tracks derailed, while my desk overflowed with notes, timelines, and tools of retribution. I'd spent weeks perfecting this, not just to hurt her, but to dismantle everything she dared to build behind my back. Tom was next. His career was teetering, his reputation frayed, but I wanted more. I wanted him to see her as the poison she'd become to me. The package I'd sent him was just the spark. Now I'd fan the flames. I used the burner phone again, texting him a single line. "Ask her about the scarf." No context, no signature, just enough to burrow into his mind. I knew he'd connect it to that emerald green thread I'd found months ago, the one she'd lied about. Let him wonder how deep her deception ran, how many others she'd tangled in her web. I pictured him staring at his phone, doubt creeping in, and felt a cold thrill. Emily slept upstairs, oblivious, while I laid the final bricks of her ruin. Friday morning, Emily's phone buzzed incessantly. She ignored it at first, sipping coffee across from me, her eyes hollow. "Tom's freaking out," she muttered, almost to herself, then glanced at me, gauging my reaction. I shrugged, buttering toast. "Sounds like his problem." She nodded, but her fingers twitched, betraying her nerves. I knew why. Tom had texted her. I'd seen the screen flash when she left it on the counter. "What scarf?" he'd asked, short and sharp. She hadn't answered yet, but the question was a splinter under her skin. By noon, he called. She took it in the backyard, her voice low, urgent. I watched through the window, pretending to read the paper. She paced, gesturing wildly, her face crumpling as the conversation stretched. I couldn't hear the words, but I didn't need to. The seed I'd planted had taken root. He was turning on her, suspicion poisoning whatever they'd shared. She came back inside, pale, and mumbled something about misunderstandings. I nodded, silent, letting her stew in the mess she'd made. That afternoon, I struck again. I'd saved one last recording. Her voice, soft and laughing, telling Tom, he'll never suspect a thing. I'd held it back, waiting for the perfect moment. Now, I sent it to him from the throwaway account, no message, just the audio. Let him hear her mock me, let it drive the knife deeper. I tracked his ex-posts after frantic, disjointed rants about trust and games. Emily's phone lit up again, and this time, she didn't answer. The cracks were widening, and I was ready to push them over the edge. Saturday, the college hosted an open forum, students and faculty airing grievances over the scandal. I tipped off the blog again, ensuring a crowd. Emily stayed home, claiming a headache, but Tom was there. I went, blending into the back, watching as he stood at the podium, trying to salvage his dignity. "These are lies," he said, voice cracking. "Fabricated to ruin me." But the students weren't buying it. Someone played the recording, the one about me never suspecting, over a speaker. Gasps rippled through the room. Tom froze, his eyes darting, then bolted off stage. Whispers turned to shouts. Students demanding answers, faculty squirming. Emily's name surfaced, tied to him by rumor and that damning voice. I slipped out, my pulse steady, and checked X. The forum was trending locally. Hashtags like #FacultyFiasco and #CaughtInTheAct spiraling. Emily's suspension was now a footnote. Her career was ash. Tom's too. I'd turned their secret into a spectacle, and they'd never recover. She was on the couch when I got home, staring at nothing. "It's everywhere," she whispered, her phone dark in her lap. "They think I'm a liar." I sat beside her, quiet, letting her words echo. She didn't ask if I'd heard, didn't suspect I'd lit the match. I handed her a glass of water, my face a mask of concern, and she took it, trembling. The revenge was sweet, but incomplete. I wanted her to feel it all, the isolation, the shame, before the final blow. Sunday, Tom showed up. I'd expected it, hoped for it. He pounded on our door, disheveled, his voice hoarse. "Emily, we need to talk," he yelled. I opened it, calm, stepping aside. "She's upstairs," I said, and he brushed past me, wild-eyed. She came down, her face a mix of fear and fury, and they argued in the living room. Loud, messy, raw. "You ruined me," he shouted. "You played me," she shot back. I stood in the kitchen, listening, my hands steady on a knife as I sliced an apple. It unraveled fast. He accused her of leaking the recordings, of setting him up. She threw the scarf story back at him. Who else knew about it? And he stormed out, slamming the door. She sank to the floor, sobbing, and I watched, silent. She didn't look at me, didn't ask for comfort. Good. I didn't have any to give. That night, I packed a bag, small, deliberate, and left it by the basement stairs. The end was close, and I'd be ready. I sent one last message from the burner, this time to her. "I know everything. No explanation, just that. Her phone pinged as I sat across from her at dinner, and she froze, staring at it. She didn't open it, didn't meet my eyes. The silence was thick, suffocating, and I let it linger, savoring her dread. She knew something was wrong, but not the depth of it. Not yet. Monday morning, I finished it. Emily was still asleep when I left, her phone clutched in her hand. I drove downtown, dropped a final package at her college mailbox. Printouts of every email, every photo, every lie she'd spun, addressed to the dean with a note. "She's all yours." Then I went home, packed my bag into the truck, and waited. She woke late, found me in the kitchen, and stopped short. "John?" she asked, voice small. "I'm done," I said, simple, final. Her eyes widened, but I didn't stop. "I built our life and you tore it down. Now you live with the rubble." I handed her a folder, copies of the same evidence, her affair laid bare. She gasped, flipping through it, tears falling. "You did this?" she whispered, realization dawning. I nodded. "You and Tom can have each other's wreckage." I walked out, her sobs echoing behind me. I didn't look back. I drove to a new city, a new job I'd lined up weeks ago, my bridges burned clean. She'd lose the house. Foreclosure notices were already in motion, thanks to a few calls I'd made. Tom's career was dust, his debts swallowing him. They'd have nothing but each other's ruins, a cruel symmetry to the life they'd tried to steal from me. My revenge wasn't loud or messy. It was a collapse, precise and total, and I'd walked away from the debris.